Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. We're starting right before our end of our 250.
I can't believe we're getting there.
I can't believe oh my gosh, what a year. But we're going to talk about some really important founders and some just really kind of that like foundational things. And I know you're like, Liz, we already did this at the beginning, but there are some people that just deserve their own podcast or some things that deserve their own podcast.
And we're not just doing biographies. We're doing sort of underappreciated or forgotten features of their political thought and their actions that you might not know about.
And maybe some historical drama, because we all know that's my favorite. So we're starting with the Pennsylvania Constitution. We are not doing all 13 colonies. We are doing Pennsylvania, though. Have Dr. Beienberg with me. Dr. Beienberg, why are we talking about the Pennsylvania Constitution?
Ben Franklin is, I think, usually if we think of who are the most famous founders, I think it's usually some combination of Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Adams, Franklin. That's 6. There's usually 6 that are always in there. Franklin's always in there. I'm going to make a case for why Roger Sherman should be in that list in a subsequent session, and Adams. I'm going to make a case for why Sherman should be in there, but I think Franklin is certainly probably the most famous for much of in the worldwide for a lot of period. But Franklin is mostly known for all the scientist stuff and his pithy quotes in the book and the publishing, and that's all fine. Mm-hmm. But I think that Franklin, part of his legacy that's not appreciated is that he is at least one of the 3 most influential, apparently, probably the most influential of the folks writing the Pennsylvania Constitution. And that is a document that I think needs to be better appreciated. If there were 3 texts that people don't understand about the founding that they need to know, one is the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress, which we talked about at length. That's sort of the First Continental Congress's protests, largely on localism against Parliament. And then the second 2 are the Pennsylvania and Massachusetts constitutions. You can't understand American constitutionalism without them. So on this session on Franklin, I thought what we might do would be thinking about the Pennsylvania Constitution, why it's important, and then eventually why it becomes basically the punching bag when they decide to make the U.S. Constitution. As I tell my students, they're basically subtweeting what they did in Pennsylvania, don't do that. So the Pennsylvania Constitution is drafted in 1776. John Adams in the Continental Congress pushes through a resolution saying states get ready for self-government, start putting your stuff together, which they all take to mean like get your state constitutions in order. What do you want to scratch out? Royally appointed governor, whatever it is you're going to do. Pennsylvania gets really excited, and they take this seriously as a chance to build. I mean, they often have lines saying like, "Isn't this amazing? We have a chance to build a new civilization, like a new set of ideas, new institutions." And so they take that. They're very influenced by Tom Paine and the idea of self-government. And they take that and they run with it. And they run with it really, really hard. We don't have great records on it. In fact, literally this morning I read through all of them again, which took me like 20 minutes. Because the convention, we don't have something like Madison's notes, right?
Oh.
We just basically have a couple of motions and they're very minimal. Well, think about this. They're putting this Constitution together in July of 1776. July, August, September. What else is happening then? There's an actual revolution happening, right? So they can't be too fast. So we don't have much of the records, but the secondary accounts again suggest that Franklin was one of the major figures. He is the formal president of the convention.
Okay.
So some features about it that I think are worth noting and perhaps worth celebrating, particularly its Declaration of Rights. It's widely copied in other states. It expands on and copies most of what's in Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights. It adds a lot more. So robust protections of freedom of speech, trial by jury and all the criminal procedure protections, a very robust right to keep and bear arms, religious liberty, like all the things that you sort of would expect in a Declaration of Rights is in the Pennsylvania one. So it expands on what Mason had, but search and seizure, all kinds of great things in it. It has a lot of political theory in it, so it's very wordy and lots of sort of kind of moralizing sounding language, like it's good for government that, and then like the right to vote is an important thing, and so therefore you should do it, right? So it has kind of lots of rhetorical, kind of admonitory stuff, and they pare that back later. But still, it has a lot of political theory in there, but a lot of really robust discussions of rights. Its religious liberty, I think, may strike modern audiences as constrained. At the time, I would say they're quite expansive. So governing officials have to believe in God, the Old Testament, and the New Testament as inspired, but they can be of any denomination. But citizens of all kinds who are not atheists have all civil rights and all have the right to worship as long as they're not disrupting peace or breaking sort of public order. We've talked about the atheist thing before, but that's just not because they're concerned for souls. It's because they really have this idea that oaths are essential to basically being a good citizen. That if you swear an oath to something, you need to be scared that you're going to follow through on it.
Okay.
So that's a theme that's come up before, and it will come up again. So the Declaration of Rights has a guarantee of public education, which I think is the first constitutional text to have that, so that the local governments are expected to stand that up. They have constraints on debtors' prisons. You can't just go to jail for being poor. There's quite a bit that's, I think, quite interesting and cool about this Constitution. But there are also some things that are not so good. So this
Give me the tea.
Yeah, exactly. So if you read the Constitutional Convention records of 1787, Madison and crew, they are constantly ragging on the Pennsylvania Constitution. James Wilson, who is from Pennsylvania, basically goes there and says, guys, what we're doing in Pennsylvania, do not do this. Do not do this when you are writing the U.S. Constitution. Madison's Vices, that document where he's complaining about what makes for bad constitutionalism before the convention meets, is full of implicit references to the Pennsylvania Constitution.
Oh.
And the Federalist Papers name it repeatedly. Federalist 48, 49, and 50 all pretty much call it out for being a bad constitution in various ways. And I'm sure there's others. Those are just the ones that jump out to me, come to me offhand. Yeah, it's very, very criticized. So why? Well, the feature that makes it interesting and memorable also is its flaw, which is that it gets very excited about democracy and pretty much nothing else. That is to say, it makes democracy the sort of almost uniform goal. The single-minded goal. And so it structurally has incredibly direct democracy with annual elections. It has no governor. There is a president, quote unquote, which again is worth emphasizing. They pick the weaker title of president instead of governor because they want to do less. But it doesn't have a governor. It has a president who is picked by basically picked by the legislature to a one-year term.
Is it the president of the legislature, or is this like a separate executive office?
It's a separate executive office chosen from among the people who were part of the legislative office.
Interesting.
It's a little more complicated. There's this sort of council thing. But it's effectively the legislature picking kind of one of their own or sort of adjacent to them on a one-year term. So this person has no meaningful independence. It has very, very weak courts. So they're on 7-year renewable terms. They can be removed earlier than that by the legislature, I think by a majority vote. So
legislature has a lot of power.
The legislature has almost unchecked power. So this is why when Madison's Vices, when he says, there's unjust laws. They pass lots of stupid laws. They pass laws too fast. They don't think them through very well. Therefore, we need structures and the separation of powers and whatnot is very much, as I tell the students, they're subtweeting Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania and then the two states that copied it, Georgia and Vermont. They're kicking around because, again, this is being put together in mid-1776. Continental Congress members are there, and then they're going back to their home states and saying, we got this cool constitution from Pennsylvania. Let's try it too. So Georgia and Vermont both copy it. Vermont's not a state at this point, but they putting it together pretty quickly. So it is to say it's basically direct democracy. And they assume that, and this is where this is why I think the Pennsylvania Constitution is so important to understand the later constitutional architecture. the assumption basically that they make in Pennsylvania is that the primary check is going to be the people obsessively following what their government is doing and making sure it doesn't do anything bad, right? So the actual check that they think is going to be the most important is all the procedural stuff about publicity. Like you have to print stuff. You have to have everything considered so the voters can look at it before it gets finally voted on. And so it's these kinds of things because they think they just can't conceive the idea that self-government would go wrong. Right? There's this kind of Enlightenment optimism about the people will do it right. We'll have democracy. The people will check it. A virtuous citizenry will be. Well, I mean, in their defense, we're fighting a war to kick out what now feels to us like a foreign power to get self-government. Of course, we're going to take this seriously. And so there is a logic to it, but empirically, it does not work out very well. So it basically creates a direct democracy, and for all the reasons that Madison and Crew talk about, and John Adams, direct democracy we know doesn't often work very well. And so it is, in some sense, the really fascinating alternate road of American constitutionalism, which some of the Western states pick back up with, say, initiative and referendum and whatnot, arguably. But the Pennsylvania Constitution is what happens when you build a constitution that focuses basically on direct democracy without institutional checks. They don't want institutional checks because they think that the people will be virtuous, and institutional checks are just places for the system to get bogged down and captured and co-opted. So it's a fascinating understanding that follows from one interpretation of the Declaration of Independence, the self-government part, but not the sort of institutional constraints that we also see sort of littered throughout the Declaration of Independence, right? The importance of having independent judges, the importance of divided power, right? All that stuff, they basically just say, no, the self-government part is what we want because we've been reading a lot of Tom Paine.
I mean, which is great, but like right before this, we did a whole thing on the lore of the founding, and basically all the lessons we've learned, I say we as like the royal we here, about like instances where things like this don't work, where you give somebody unchecked power or give, a body an unchecked power. Like, I feel like they're just living in la la land.
Well, no, I don't like this text. I think it's crazy for many reasons, but their thinking is it's annual elections, and basically everything is going to have to be distributed and publicly accessible to voters, right? So they're thinking that is the check, that the voters themselves are the check. And they look back to the other governments and say, well, it's not like, you're having that much sort of direct popular intervention, at the end of the Roman state or something, right? So that's what they think the check will be, a virtuous citizenry with the institutional check of annual elections, with the ability to see what their government is doing with all the publicity restrictions on, what gets put out, how quickly stuff because they assume that the Pennsylvania Constitution says everything has to be voted on repeatedly, but they, of course, as you know from legislative procedure, they'll just unanimously consent waive all that stuff. So there is actually a coherent logic to it.
Okay.
There is a coherent logic to it, but it is not taking into account, as you alluded to, political history. When we talk about with the other ones, sort of the often, shall we say, mixed view of human nature that the more Christian founders are going to have, right? So again, there are reasons that this is not a very great constitution, but it's worth understanding their logic to then understand, because I think that logic still has an appeal to lots of people today, which is we should take a gigantic poll of what the 50% plus one of Americans want and do that, right? And like that temptation is still with us today. And I think the Pennsylvania Constitution is a helpful case study of, in fact, why that might not be the better system and why the better ones might be, say, the more robust constitutionalism of, say, John Adams and the U.S. Constitution that comes later. I will also say one other thing that I think this Constitution does well that gets picked up even more so by others. It has a clear and explicit sense that the Constitution is binding on all of the government and especially the legislature, right? Because the English Bill of Rights technically only applies to the monarch. Right? And so they make clear to say, no, this is binding on all of the government, and there is a mechanism, albeit a really bad one, called the Council of Censors, to chide the legislature for violating the Constitution, to recommend ways to correct it, and so it has an enforcement mechanism. And then they'll make that even stronger in 1790, when basically all of the gang that got the U.S. Constitution over the line, James Wilson particularly, come back, James Wilson and Benjamin Rush, and they say, all right, this U.S. Constitution is really cool. which borrows from Massachusetts. Let's rewrite the Pennsylvania one to look like that. And so they do. And so they rewrite this. They leave the Declaration of Rights basically alone. They take off some of the nice political theory. But otherwise, it looks much more like Massachusetts and much more like the U.S. Constitution. And Rush has actually been citing John Adams very heavily and criticizing this for years. And so, spoilers, our next podcast will be about John Adams and the different version of the Constitution. As a preview there.
It's interesting because I'm looking at the Declaration of Rights, and a lot of these things I'm like ex post facto laws and attainder, like a lot of this stuff exists in our Constitution. So genuinely, from just a like cursory glance, I'm like, this Constitution looks fine, but
that's the Declaration of Rights, which
like the other articles, I'm like, these look fine. Now, granted, some of them were added later, like especially in the Declaration of Rights, the prohibition against the denial or abridgment of equality of sex was
that's like 1971.
Yeah. But then the one on race is 2021.
Well, sort of. There's another one that basically says about civil. And to be clear, I've been talking about the Franklin 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution.
We're not talking about the 2021.
I'm literally writing a book about the other one. So it does exist, but it's very, very, very different. So the Declaration of Rights, they did a pretty good job, and so that is carried over. But to the civil rights one, they actually have one, I want to say also from the 70s, that basically says civil rights are guaranteed, and then the legislative history on how that equal protection on race, what that was doing on top of the equal protection of civil rights. It's kind of a weird legislative history, but yeah, it's the Declaration of Rights was not the controversial part even then. Like John Adams, and they more or less pick up the Pennsylvania one. It's the structural stuff, which again is a theme that I think we keep coming back to in this podcast. That listing out rights is Justice Scalia used to say, if you read the Bill of Rights of the Soviet Constitution, it looks great, but there's no structure to actually enforce it.
Yeah. There you go. I have one more question.
Yes.
Why is it called the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not the state of Pennsylvania?
There's a couple that do that. Virginia does it as well.
Kentucky.
As Kentucky. I think those are the only three. I don't know what there's a sort of conscious reasoning for that. Yeah, I don't remember what the reasoning is for. It was a term that was used to describe polities back in the day. So why they specifically said we need to do that I don't know what that.
Massachusetts is one too.
Massachusetts is one too. Yes, that's right.
But they still they still have the same structures as states. Like there's not these like huge differences.
No, that doesn't mean anything. Commonwealth versus state doesn't mean anything. It just in their court cases, instead of saying like state v. Evans or state v. Beienberg, it says Commonwealth v. But no. It gets actually dicey in Pennsylvania because when they added this, they had a Secretary of the Commonwealth, but it does what the Secretary of State does in other states, and so the language is sort of hazy between the state constitution still says Commonwealth, but if you actually go on the websites, it often will say like Secretary of State or something like that. I'll pull it up. Look, you can test me on it right now.
I believe you, but this is like
they call it the Secretary of the State often, even in the Pennsylvania government documents.
I will look this up. But so this is perfect for our next one. The next one is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Dr. Beienberg, thank you for going over the Pennsylvania Constitution and Ben Franklin. And before I go, I just want to say, go Birds. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.